It's interesting. The question itself really starts to tell you where we're at as believers, because we've we see in the Old Testament, in the book of Isaiah, it comes up twice that God is the first and the last. He's the beginning and the end. And in that statement, he's talking about the gods of the nations, and he says, the other gods, they're not able to declare the end from the beginning. They're not able to show you what has happened in the ancient past. They're not able to tell you the things that are coming in the future. And this statement of declaring from the end, or declaring the end from the beginning, I mean, it really speaks to me of theology itself. When we look at all of theology, we think the end cap, the last thing that we study, is eschatology, but that's not the truth. From the very beginning of the scripture, from Genesis 1, we have, in the beginning God created, and that statement in itself is an eschatological statement, that just as God created in the beginning, so we see at the very end a new heaven and a new earth, that the old has passed away and the new has come. Well, just as we have a physical kingdom being built in Genesis 1, a physical world, a physical heaven and earth, so it is that at the end, when the new heaven is made, when the new earth is made, it's a physical thing. Yeah, it's spiritual, but so was the first one. The first one was spiritual, the second one's spiritual. It seems to me like the question of whether the Old Testament contains eschatology, well, it's kind of a misguided question. And we think as Christians so often that if you want to look at eschatology, you have to look at the prophets of the Old Testament, and you have to ask the question of, well, what prophecies were fulfilled and which prophecies were not fulfilled. But that's not the way that those who were writing the book saw it, and that's certainly not the way that it was read for hundreds of years after the prophets. And even when you look at some of the prophecies that regard Mashiach, we're talking about 800 years ahead of 800 years afterwards is when Jesus actually walked on the earth. And Jesus doesn't always see it as a fulfillment of that time. And so I think we need to be really careful with the way that we handle the end time subject, especially when it comes to the Old Testament.